Hello and welcome to Band Literature Reviews with Brandon Searles. Band Literature Reviews is a series that evaluates concert band music from the perspective of a small school director. This is episode 9. It's Flex Time. In today's show, I'll explain how flex arrangements work, why they make things easier for small schools, and then I will discuss 3 flex pieces: Zig Zag, Wingspan, and Themes from the Planets. It's Flex Time. Hello everybody, welcome back. I am here to talk to you guys about flex or flexible instrumentation arrangements for band and review some pieces as I have been doing. I am getting close to the end of my project. I'm really excited about that and getting right towards the end of school here as I record this. This has just been a really great experience with you guys, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. To begin, I'm going to talk about what is flex. What's a flex arrangement? A flexible arrangement is a piece of music that has been either created originally or adapted to include multiple parts that are somewhat similar to how the voicing system in a choir works, like SATB. Each part has a different harmonic role to it. Within each of those roles, you can have several different instruments most of the time that can play that role. This could also even include strings. There are a lot of flex arrangements that include string parts as well. As far as the parts are concerned in and of themselves, in my experience, I have seen anywhere from 4 to 7 different parts listed. Some arrangements divide the parts up into woodwind and brass. Others will say something to the effect of brass preferred or strings and woodwinds preferred. And in fact, just this last week, I performed a flex arrangement piece with my band that had parts where it notated that, where it said brass preferred for this section, and then it says tutti to bring them back in with the entire band. Here are a few things I learned from experience with flex arrangements. My recommendation is try to have at least one veteran member of your ensemble on each part. Their leadership is really important in this, whether or not it's on their individual instrument or if all the instruments are different on that part. One way or another, you want to have a veteran on each part. Next, you're going to really want to study your score beforehand, before you assign the parts, because you have to think more about the individual strengths of each of your students and how you're going to be able to manage that, and who you think will be your more technical players, who will be more loud players, and how to balance that based on the numbers on each part. One other thing that I have done with flex arrangements that's helped out a lot is use sticky notes and put your students' names on those sticky notes for each of the parts. That way you don't have to keep erasing on the score each time you do this arrangement, because odds are you're not going to be able to remember exactly who is on what part, and it helps to have that written down. Instead, just use the sticky notes and it'll speed up the rehearsal process. Another idea that I learned from experience is you should try combining with other bands and schools using flex arrangements. Odds are, if you're in a small school like I am, you have some kind of partnership with another small size school nearby, and you occasionally combine for sports or even for band things. That would be a really cool way to collaborate. You can use these flex arrangements to not only go smaller, but also go bigger. And another great idea with this is doing honor bands or doing some sort of mass group festival or district festival. This is a great way to include everybody in on that. Or if you ever want to do a collaboration between you and, say, the orchestra program at your school, if you have that. There are just a lot of different applications of flexible arrangements. And then lastly, the common question that I feel like people would have is, are flex arrangements only for smaller schools? No, it doesn't have to be for smaller schools. As I was kind of alluding to, larger bands can benefit from flex arrangements, especially in situations that are incorporating string players into the band. Say, for example, you have that clarinet player that also takes violin lessons and says, I really want to be able to play a piece of music with the band, but we don't have an orchestra program. I really want to play violin, though. You can accommodate that. And then another reason to do flex arrangements is it gives opportunities to certain instruments that are traditionally put in a certain role. For example, everybody knows that French horns in marches have offbeats. And that's ridiculous for them to keep on doing that over and over and over and over again. In one aspect, it helps them hone their quote-unquote tools of the trade, but on the other hand, a little bit of variety never hurts. And you can have that French horn player maybe play the trombone line, what would normally be the trombone part. For example, Stars and Stripes Forever by John Philip Sousa. If you look at that march, there's that fun trombone part that happens the second time of the return of the melody at the very end. Imagine a French horn player or a French horn section doing that. That'd be kind of cool. The applications are endless when it comes to flex arrangements, and I've been very impressed with those flex arrangements myself. With that being said, let's go ahead and move into our first piece, which is Zig Zag. Alright, welcome back everybody. That was the piece Zig Zag by Sean O'Loughlin. The key signature is C minor, 3 flats. The genre style is thematic or traditional band literature. It's considered grade level 1.5. It is 2 minutes 30 seconds long, 79 measures. The publisher is Excelsia Music Publishing. It was published in the year 2019. Tempos present in it are 144 beats per minute, 100 beats per minute, and 80 beats per minute. Now let's talk about the composer. Sean O'Loughlin is an orchestral conductor and composer. He specializes in flex arrangements, and he has worked with a lot of pop icons, which I found kind of interesting. So he has a very large breadth of experience as far as orchestrating and arranging things, which makes sense in the context of flex arrangements. As far as the grade level is concerned, I think the 1.5 is pretty accurate. There are some distinct challenges that are present, but overall not too unmanageable and definitely approachable by groups that play other 1.5, maybe even 2 level literature. As far as the instrumentation is concerned, this part will look a little bit different with it being a flex arrangement. This is a 5-part flex arrangement plus percussion, so 6 total different parts, quote unquote. it would require roughly 6 percussionists to fully instrument it, but to be able to play it at all you would need would be only like 2 to 3. The percussion instruments that are kind of out of the norm that you might not have are the tam-tam and the vibroslap. Otherwise, everything else is pretty standard percussion. There's also an optional piano part with this, and I would say that you could do this piece with as few as 12 students playing, including percussionists. However, that would be spreading things quite thin. I would definitely recommend having more than 12 in regards to being able to play this specific one. Moving on to the ranges and challenges. The part A is trumpet, clarinet, flute, and the highest note in there is up to a concert C in the staff. And obviously with flute it would be an octave above that, but for clarinet, trumpet it's the D in the staff. The part B doesn't cross the break hardly at all except for one time at the very end. So by and large your less experienced clarinet players could play part B or C. Another thing that makes this actually easier, that's not so much a range or challenge, but a concession, I guess you could call it, is that, as you probably noticed, the melody is pretty repetitive, and it just continues to pass and zigzag. Part of the reasoning behind the name, the melody zigzags from part to part. And because of that repetitive melody, it makes it easier for others in the group to be able to play that, and makes it so that ultimately it doesn't take as much time and as much effort to learn. Another thing to consider is the mids and lows need to be fairly solid. There are definitely parts of this where the lows have important melodies that really need to be brought out, and having a timid lower winds, brass, strings section, they might struggle a little bit with this. Moving on to rhythms and percussion. The rhythms are pretty straightforward. They're mainly quarter notes and eighth notes in the melodic parts. There are some accents, but they're not too tricky or difficult, and can be decently managed even by a beginning group that's only just starting to see different accent patterns. In the percussion part, there are relatively few 16th notes. Everything else is eighth notes, quarter notes. The accent pattern, while I did say that it's fairly simple, there are a few accents that are on weak beats, and that would definitely end up being a bit of a challenge, but I definitely think that it could be more or less easily overcome. The last thing that I noticed as far as the challenge is concerned is that there are some tempo changes in there that are not as easy, and they're quite sudden and require your group to watch a little more closely overall. However, nothing too extreme. That being said, my overall recommendation for this piece is yes, I definitely think a small school band, even with limited experience, could do a piece like this. So I highly recommend it. It's really a great piece, and I got to play this last year with my band, and they did a pretty good job of it. The keys to success on this are, number one, to have a confident low winds strings section. Like I said before, they have the melody at a few important parts. They need to be able to be solid and confident on that. You will need to have either a clarinet that can cross the break, or a trumpet player that can play those middle-ish high range notes, depending on your trumpet skill level, to be able to accommodate for that. And you need to have at least 12 students. As you can tell, there are a lot less keys to success on these flex arrangements, which makes things a lot simpler in a lot of ways. Let's go ahead and move on to our next piece. This is Wingspan. All right, once again, welcome back, everybody. That was the piece Wingspan by Nathan Daughtrey. The key signature is F major, 1 flat. The genre style is thematic. It's grade level 2. It is 2 minutes and 50 seconds long and 72 measures. The publisher is C. Allen Publications in the year 2024, a very recent one. And the tempo is 132 beats per minute. Moving on to talk about the composer, Nathan Daughtrey is an accomplished percussion performer. He writes a lot of band music across all levels with engaging percussion parts. He is the president of C. Allen Publications, and as you can imagine, writes a lot of percussion ensemble pieces as well. Moving to the grade level, I would say it's pretty accurate with maybe a few exceptions, and I'll elaborate on that here shortly. The instrumentation is 5 flex parts plus percussion, so 6 total parts. The upper 3 parts are considered soprano and alto voices. The bottom 2 parts are considered tenor and bass voices. It's recommended that you have 5 percussionists for this one, and that includes 2 timpani total and a tam-tam. Otherwise, pretty standard percussion instruments that you heard in the recording. This would require that you have at least some clarinets and or trumpets. Part of the reason for this is that 3 of those 5 parts have trumpets or clarinets listed, which means you're going to have to spread out those sections quite a bit. So having a decent number between those 2 sections is kind of important in this particular arrangement. Moving on to the ranges and challenges. There are a lot of varied articulations. The first part crosses the break for any clarinet players on first part. The second part crosses the break just once. There is also a relative minor section, which creates some trickier accidentals. Like I said, it's F major, and it goes into D minor, concert D minor, which for your saxophones, your clarinets, create some kind of wonky notes, and also for your brass, create a few fifth positions that are fairly important to be able to get in the trombones, and just a few slightly more awkward valve combinations as well, but nothing terribly unmanageable. There are some other non-diatonic parts in all sections of the piece that show things like secondary dominance and all this music theory speak that we can definitely spend a lot of time on. But for the sake of time, I'll keep moving on. There are a lot of rests in very unusual places. And lastly, there are a lot of transitions. There's the coda, there's that tricky ending that is not going to be easy to do, where a xylophone does a gliss up, and the clarinets, trumpets, flutes have these fun little grace notes that need to all line up. And that makes it really, really hard, especially after coming off of a rest. I think that that's going to be a little bit tricky for your group and going to be one of the proving points of this piece. As far as rhythms and percussion are concerned, there are program notes for the percussion that are very detailed and very helpful. And once again, this is coming from a person who composed this, having been a percussionist his entire life. The xylophone part is quite a challenge. During that relative minor section, it has this solo that's just awesome sounding, but at the same time, not easy. Being able to do this 8th, 16th pattern, which I will notate that part above my head here so you can take a look at it so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But that xylophone pattern is not going to be easy. But whoever your xylophone player is, they're going to be pretty dang happy with the challenge, or they'll be overwhelmed. One of the two. Make sure you have a confident xylophone player, because that is not easy stuff. Another thing about the percussion is that each percussionist plays at least 2 instruments, and sometimes those instruments are not ones that usually go together. For example, the timpani player also has to play suspended cymbal. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, the ending, there are the grace note, gliss type of ending that you have to really line up rhythmically to make it sound good. And if your band doesn't do that, it's the very last note of the piece, and people are going to remember that. So making sure that you hone that ending a lot right from the get-go is very important. My overall recommendation on this one is yes. However, it might be fairly challenging, especially for your younger players, say your 6th graders that you might or might not have in band. Your younger players are definitely going to need to be up to the challenge, and maybe not on the more challenging instruments that I listed before. That being said, keys to success, Number one, you need to have some very capable percussionists, especially the mallets player. While I kept on going on and on and on about how it's the xylophone part, it's actually xylophone and bells. There's some variety there. Neither of those parts is innately easy, so your mallets player needs to be a pretty good one. Your band will need to have some experience with playing codas, because this particular piece had a coda to it, and being able to do that transition is not always easy, especially in players that are more reactive than proactive. So teaching them to be proactive is definitely a must on that. And then you need to have at least several, and by several I mean about 4 to 5 clarinets and or trumpets to be able to really pull this off and not have super thin instrumentation, especially on those middle parts. Make sure that you have the right number of players for that. That's everything I've got on Wingspan. It is a very nice little piece. I really enjoyed listening to it, and I hope you did too. Let's go ahead and move on to our last piece, which is Themes from the Planets. All right, that was themes from the planets. The composer is Gustav Holst, arranged by Douglas E. Wagner. The key signatures in this are E flat major and B flat major, 3 flats and 2 flats respectively. The genre style is modern. It's a grade level 2 piece. It's 3 minutes 45 seconds long, 106 measures. The publisher is Bellman Mills Corporation, published in the year 2023. Tempos present are 69 beats per minute, 120 beats per minute, 72 beats per minute, and 126 beats per minute. Also, I should mention that the pieces present in this are Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. It misses out on several of the other planets, but obviously with this being a lower grade level, we don't want it to be all that much longer than it already is. So, that being said, let's talk about the composer and arranger. So, Gustav Holst, I've already mentioned, first suite in E flat, was one of my first pieces I reviewed on this channel. And Douglas E. Wagner was also another arranger that I've already talked about. Both of them do a really great job. Gustav Holst, I have to say, is probably one of my favorite band composers of all time. Moving on to the grade level. This grade level, I would say, is fairly accurate, although I will say that it probably plays a little bit harder than the grade level indicates. And I will get into that here in just a moment. But first, let's talk about the instrumentation. This is a 5-part flex plus percussion, so 6 total different parts. The recommendation is about 5 or 6 percussionists to fully instrument it. And you could probably get away with a few less than that, but not many. The clarinets can play parts 1 through 4, which is pretty significant and quite a large breadth. There's also an included piano part, but it's not notated in the score. The part 3 is pretty wide open and pretty easy to instrument because there are 5 different instrument lines that could end up playing that. Moving on to the ranges and challenges. The part 1 crosses the break, second part does not. The biggest challenge I think in this one is there are lots of accidentals in this. The other part of this is that there are some dissonances that might be a bit hard for some of the less confident players. There are some suspensions in there that, combined with the fermatas and the retardandos, could make things a little bit messy and difficult to teach. The ending is super tough for the woodwinds. This offbeat staccato pattern that goes suddenly really quickly, that isn't going to be the easiest thing to do. And then both of the horn parts are in a fairly manageable range. So that's a little bit step off the gas, so to speak, in the context of this piece. Moving on to rhythms and percussion. The percussion part is pretty straightforward and maybe even a little bit boring. So going polar opposite from Wingspan right before this. The next part of rhythms and percussion is this is a great opportunity to teach triplets. Let's be honest, the most iconic part of Mars is that ominous triplet in 5/4 pattern. This would be a really easy way to teach it because it's all unison one pitch and makes it super easy because it's also starting on beat 1 on a strong beat and makes it so that they can figure out what that rhythm is and be able to have success with it pretty quickly. Speaking of the time signature, the original arrangement of the Mars movement of this suite is in 5/4 time. In this, it's simplified. I'm going to say that with air quotes. The simplified version of it in here is alternating 3/4 time and 2/4 time, which I feel like the jury's still out on that. In some ways, it does make it easier to understand and understand the division of the beat pattern. But at the same time, it can be intimidating to look at alternating 3/4 2/4 3/4 2/4 for 20 measures. That being said, here's an example of it on the trombone part right above my head. You can basically see everything that I just talked about there. Moving on, there are some really challenging rests in especially the Mars movement of this. It's very easy to blow the rests. Very easy. It could definitely get very embarrassing really quickly. So being able to manage and count very confidently and play very firmly is super important to being able to accomplish this piece. There are also a variety of tempo changes that could make things pretty hard. A lot of them are fairly sudden, not gradual, and being able to, number one, come up with that tempo, and number two, have your students follow could be a bit of a challenge with the number of transitions there are. Lastly, there are some dotted 8th, 16th notes that could make things a little bit more difficult because at grade level 2, you might have just introduced that concept to your players, but odds are they probably haven't experienced that, which could make things a little bit more difficult. That being said, my overall recommendation is yes, with a few caveats. Just bear in mind that this is definitely going to be a challenge, and if you do choose to do this, I would make this your most challenging piece and maybe do 2 other easier ones if you're doing a 3-piece set, because this is definitely going to take up a lot of your rehearsal time. Here are my keys to success for this piece. Number 1, you need to have a big enough group to make the Mars section sound as powerful as it should, because if you're not making a statement with that, it's honestly, in my opinion, not worth doing. So making that really, really big sound to be able to, so to speak, hit the audience in the face musically is, I think, a part of playing that particular movement. Next, number 2, you need to have a group that is good at navigating different time signatures and tempos. Number 3, you'll need to at least have 1 clarinet that can cross the break. And then number 4, you need to have all your players know how to count solidly. Other than that, pretty straightforward piece, pretty enjoyable, but definitely going to be a challenge if you choose to go forward with it. That's all I have on the Themes from the Planets by Gustav Holst and arranged by Douglas Wagner. Thank you again, everybody, for listening. This was episode 9. It's flex time. You can give me feedback by putting comments into the comment section below the video here. You can also email me with suggestions or feedback at bandlitreviews@gmail.com. Please check out my YouTube channel and see some of my other videos if you haven't already. And I will look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks again for watching and listening.